Just to quickly recap my round 1 predictions, I got 7 out of 8 with the wins and 5 out of 8 with the margins. I was incorrect with the Dolphins beating the Rabbitohs and therefore automatically I'm incorrect with their margin. I'm also incorrect with the margin of the Raiders and the Broncos in their games. So my win prediction so far this season is 7 out of 8 with a win percentage of 87.5%. Well, let's get on with the first game of this week. Kicking things off, we have the Knights taking on the Dolphins, starting with the Knights report. The Knights dealt with a lot of early pressure from the Tigers, who brought a lot of energy to the opening of the game. They managed to turn momentum in their favour after the initial wave from the Tigers, creating opportunities down the left edge with Ponga, Sharp and Best, but failing to convert those chances in the first half. Poor completion and ill discipline allowed the Tigers to take some momentum back, and they did create the better chances during the game with line breaks in the middle third, eventually cleaning up their sets and converting opportunities when individuals needed to. Only conceding 8 points shows their defence might still be their best asset. The attack looked dangerous, they just need to clean up sets to make sure we can see more of it. Moving on to the Dolphins report, there were some very serious weather-related disruptions, with Cyclone Alfred potentially having a major impact on team preparations. It felt like a slow start from the Dolphins, with field position, defensive work through the middle and the kicking game looking more effective on the side of the Rabbitohs. The second half was much more positive from the Dolphins though, with stronger carries and more meters per carry compared to that of the Rabbitohs. They also had double the line breaks and almost double the tackle breaks. The Rabbitohs then came back to retake the lead late into the game. However, my biggest concern was not about the Dolphins going behind again, but what followed. There was no urgency with 10 minutes to go, there was no serious attempt for a 2-point drop goal, and they reverted to default, just going to the short side and kicking to the corners, hoping for a Rabbitohs mistake. There was not enough intent to attack the edges when they had time to do so. So for a prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Knights to win 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have the Warriors taking on the Sea Eagles, starting with the Warriors report. The Warriors were beaten through the middle very early and they couldn't slow down the progress of the Raiders for a while. They were unable to slow down the ruck, which meant Starling was able to eat up 10 to 15 metres on multiple occasions. They also allowed too many offloads for the Raiders to get second phases, especially for Starling again. This was also on top of 44 missed tackles. In possession, it felt like their plan was very basic, with either Metcalf or Harris DeVita hoping for a quick play the ball in the red zone in order to attack the edge with a flat line. The Warriors would attack with energy, but some moments would be forced, causing them to turn over possession or not connect cleanly enough to break open the Raiders' defence. There were a few spells during the game where they'd have momentum due to poor completion rate from the Raiders, but even when they would start sets near the middle third, the default plan was a few hit-ups, then to the halfback on the short side and kick to the corners, not testing the Raiders' edges enough in midfield. But moving on to the Sea Eagles report, there are only 2 negative aspects about their performance that I want to get out of the way. First is that their completion rate was only 80%, which is not the worst of the round, but there's definitely room for improvement. Second is errors. They had 11 compared to the Cowboys' 8. Beyond that, nearly every aspect of their game was close to flawless. On the defensive side, they didn't concede a point for 70 minutes. On the offensive side, they were either perfect when throwing some shape as a unit, where they executed in tight spaces with quick and accurate hands, or when individuals had their chance to make a play themselves. We saw huge moments from the likes of Olakau'atu, Sipley and Hopuate, and even Trebojevic on the defensive side when he defused a 1v2 situation after a Cowboys line break. They won the battle through the middle, backed themselves in their ability to spread the ball, and stayed well connected and calm defensively. So for a prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Sea Eagles to win 13+. Next up, we have the Panthers taking on the Roosters, starting with the Panthers report. Their opening 15 minutes was unlike what we're used to seeing from the Panthers, but I don't think it was entirely unexpected. Since they lost Fisher Harris, losing momentum through the middle would be understandable. Also, losing Luai would have potentially meant they'd go through an adjustment period in possession. Both of these were proven to be true to start the game. However, the usual suspects in Isaiah Yeo and Nathan Cleary did what they do best. After a few lackluster attacking efforts from the Panthers early on, it took a moment from Yeo to attack a weakness in the Sharks' defence and get into the game. Cleary wasn't able to create any major opportunities initially, but he didn't shy away from responsibility, and when the Panthers needed a spark, he provided it with a kick over the top for Tango. On both sides of the ball, we saw positive signs that they can still execute like they have done over the last few years, but if they can clean up the errors, complete at a higher rate, they won't have to withstand nearly as much goal line pressure in round 2. Moving on to the Roosters report, despite a poor result, I think there are some positive signs for the Roosters to take, but I'll start with the negatives. They completed at 73%, which meant they handed the ball back to the Broncos too often, sometimes in dangerous field position. They were beaten easily inside the Broncos' own territory, the middle third, and in the red zone. On too many occasions, a single player would jump out of the line, not even in a position to jam, they'd just push up quickly and a single flat pass took them out of the game and left gaps in the defensive line. Even when players didn't jump out, the defensive line was either disconnected, with the line in two different layers, or massive gaps would form easily with defenders making the wrong reads on lead runners. However, there were some positive signs from Robert Toyer, who showed he can be a threat. Zach Docker-Clay showed sparks when he came on, which could allow Watson to transition to lock more regularly. And finally, Sandon Smith didn't have the greatest day, but I think if he's given the freedom to get creative and try things, he can be dangerous. But for a prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Panthers to win, 13+. Next up, we have the Dragons taking on the Rabbitohs, starting with the Dragons report. The Dragons started their matchup against the Bulldogs with a lot of energy, and they were happy to get into a fight through the middle and back themselves. Early on, they had good field position and looked like they were clear on their attacking intent. As the game went on, more errors crept into their game, ending up as another team with poor completion at just 68% with 15 errors, and they weren't able to return the ball effectively with only 92 kick return meters. In defence, they did allow a few line breaks, but none of them resulted in a try directly. All tries were conceded off the back of good ball movement from the Bulldogs inside the red zone, so at least they weren't leaking tries from open field plays. If their red zone defence is vulnerable this season, all they'd need to do this week is complete at a more reasonable rate so they don't turn over the ball in dangerous field position and slow down the opposition's progress through the middle. To be fair to their attack, they did put up 20 points against a quality defensive side, which doesn't sound like much, but this is against a team that only conceded 2 tries or less in a third of their games last season. But moving on to the Rabbitohs report, given that the Bunnies went into this game with major injuries to Latrell Mitchell and Cameron Murray, on top of going into the season with a big question mark over the halfback options, they did quite a solid job overall. I can reference the disrupted preparations for the Dolphins, which might have made the defensive work a little easier, but I can also mention that they held a team to just 3 tries and 4 line breaks, which is quite reasonable, against a team that includes Hamiso Tabai-Fidel, Jake Averillo, and Herbie Farnworth in the backs. Jamie Humphries went into round 1 with very limited first grade experience, but controlled the kicking game with a surprising amount of maturity, with his conversions also being the difference versus Jermaine Asako. Jai Gray, in place of Latrell Mitchell, wasn't afraid to back himself and use his agility to force the Dolphins defence to put in extra work to stop him, as he ended up with the highest post-contact meters in the game with 116. Strong meters from Graham, Whiten and Kalamatangi also kept the Rabbitohs moving up the field on both edges. But for my prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Dragons to win, 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have the Cowboys taking on the Sharks, starting with the Cowboys match report. I think the main problem they faced in round 1 was simply the quality of the squad that they had to work with. There are plenty of players you can rely on, such as Drinkwater, Dearden and Taulangi in the backs, but with a new backline, there's going to be a learning curve as a defensive unit. It's going to be difficult to replace Felt, Holmes and Townsend in the backs for this season, but they will need to adjust quickly. Looking at the tries they conceded against the Seagulls, a lot of defenders appeared flat-footed with no intent to push up and meet the ball carriers. They often allowed Manly to come to them and they were beaten by a lot of individual efforts. It feels to me like their best bet going forwards is to focus on executing the basics, complete sets at a high rate, stay well disciplined in defence when trying to pin teams back, and hope Drinkwater and Dearden can create a ton of chances again, with the forward pack still looking strong enough on paper to compete with most teams. But moving on to the Sharks report, they started with decent defensive line speed to put pressure on Cleary, Yeo and Cole to limit their time on the ball. The back line held their own defensively and got through a lot of tough work in their own end, with each player in the back line having over 100 run meters after 80 minutes, and they also each had a line break. Nico Hines had his moments throughout the game, not doing anything too crazy, but keeping things clean. He did also manage to get an assist early on into the game to set the tone against the Panthers. But Braden Trindle was the leader for me. He's happy to take on all the kicking game if needed, but his heads-up plays versus Penrith were really impressive in key moments too when the Sharks needed a spark. He put a nice little kick through for Nikora and a flat pass across to Iro to break the line, so he's looking lively in the red zone. Adam Fanua-Blake took the top spot for post-contact meters, getting himself a line break and a try. He did exactly what he was brought in to do. The Panthers were just too much over 80 minutes, but the Sharks showed a lot of great signs. But for a prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Sharks to win, 13+. Next up, we have the Raiders taking on the Broncos, starting with the Raiders report. I was really impressed with their energy and carries through the middle to start the game against the Warriors in round 1. Tarpany, Papali'i and Horsburgh dominated early in the forward battle, dragging multiple defenders and getting offloads to create second phases, and they had 7 offloads between them. They brought Tom Starling into the game and he didn't disappoint. He ate up those extra meters off the back of offloads time and time again as he was constantly available. Ethan Strange and Jamal Fogarty controlled the game really well. While they had some of the lowest run meters, Fogarty calmly controlled the kicking, and Strange ended up with 2 line break assists and 2 try assists, which is exactly what you want from your 6 and 7. Savelio Tamale had a really impressive performance as well, with the most run meters in the game and 2 line breaks. And the rest of the backs were so effective as well. The centres had over 100 run meters, both wingers over 200, getting 22 tackle breaks and 5 line breaks as a group. But moving on to the Broncos report, it initially looked like we might be getting a decent game between the Roosters and Broncos, but once the Broncos started getting on a roll, it took 6 tries from them before the Roosters answered back. They punished every little mistake from the Roosters. If one player would commit to push up, one flat pass breaks that pressure. If they were short on numbers down the short side, they'd attack the short edge and find line breaks. There was real intent from all Brisbane players to be available with support, and everyone looked comfortable in their roles and with the game plan, which is probably the result of having 2 veterans in the halves controlling each side of the field. There was a good handful of moments where they would force a play off the cuff rather than stick to the conventional plays, and most of the time, the player in possession would come off with something to punish an out-of-shape Roosters line. Their ability to slow down the progress of such a big forward pack through the middle was very impressive, and their overall defensive work shows a big difference in attitude from 2024 to round 1. So for a prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Broncos to win 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have the Eels taking on the Tigers, starting with the Eels report. The only positive I can think of for the Eels is that if the game started 35 minutes in, we would have had a competitive game. But unfortunately for Para, that's not how Rugby League works. They were incapable of slowing down the progress of the Storm through the middle and just fell asleep in defence, especially in the middle third, allowing Melbourne to just walk through. They looked so disconnected defensively with some really passive attempts from some individuals. Of course, without Mitchell Moses, you're going to struggle to have any kind of control throughout the game, but this is where Dylan Brown needs to step up. And now having to go from Gutherson to Iongi with some time needed for adjustment isn't going to help. They were beaten in almost every important stat in round 1, and as much as we can praise the Storm and their quality, they won't be able to do that to everyone, so there are questions that the Eels need to answer as soon as possible. But moving on to the Tigers report, they came out with a lot of energy, looking to move the ball quickly, get players in support and create second phases. I think they were maybe a little too erratic at times, and it would have been beneficial to settle in with a simple kicking game and apply some pressure on the Knights in their own half. They eventually lost the field position battle after their initial wave of energy and were easy to open up in the midfield, but luckily for them, the Knights messed up their chances in the first half. They were without Bula and Coruscant in round 1, which can answer some of the questions about their overall quality of execution this week, but you can see with the inclusion of Luai that he will look to play direct and instigate moments in possession. I think there's a good feeling around the Tigers at the moment, and I can see they do appear to be a stronger and more competent team on both sides of the ball. They have a lot of new pieces, so it could take time to fully click for them, but aside from the loss, I think there's genuine progress made at the Tigers. So for a prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Tigers to win 1 to 12 points. Finally for this round, we have the Bulldogs taking on the Titans, starting with the Bulldogs report. Genuinely no pun intended, but they were happy to get into a dogfight with the Dragons and take them on through the middle. When they'd spread the ball, they looked clean, with some individuals having to make a play on their own, whether that be kick out, Cherry or Tracy. Sexton and Burton made sure to get the ball moving to the edges quickly as well, so they weren't hanging around. Defensively, they still appear to be solid on their goal line, which allowed them to grow their lead during the middle portion of the game. They could maybe clean up the number of offloads for round 2, as well as reducing the number of missed tackles against a side like the Titans that have plenty of speed. Satili Tupanua put in a really good shift at his new club. Playing for only 42 minutes, he had 171 run meters, which was third best in the whole game, with the highest number of post-contact meters with 62, as well as 2 line breaks, 5 tackle breaks, and most importantly, 2 tries, towards the edge and through the middle. Moving on to the Titans report, they might not like having to come up against one of the league's best defensive units in their opening game of the season, but they definitely have players all around the squad that can do some damage. Fotueka, Campbell-Gillard and Tino Fa'asuamaleaui will punch holes through the middle plenty of times this week. They just need to make sure they can do it at the start and not allow the Bulldogs to keep them contained in their own half. If they can get offloads like the Bulldogs allowed the Dragons, they can use Campbell, Brimson and Kinney to get them on the front foot with second phases, and if the Bulldogs are missing tackles again, especially against Keanu Kinney, he'll punish them. I think the Titans are built really well all round, but I think the only questions around them right now would be how well will both Brimson and Campbell control the game without the experience of Foreign, and will they be a more consistent defensive team this season, or will they leak points? But for my prediction in this game, I'm going to go with the Bulldogs to win 1 to 12 points. So to recap my predictions for this round, I'm going to take the Knights to win by 1 to 12, the Seagulls and Panthers both to win by 13+, the Dragons to win by 1 to 12, the Sharks to win by 13+, and then the Broncos Tigers and Bulldogs, all to win by 1 to 12 points. But my win confidence this week is pretty high at 90%, very confident with a lot of the wins, but my margin confidence is slightly lower at 80% right now. But if you guys have your own predictions, please let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, it does help to get the video out there to more people. Subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with more Rugby League content, and check out the Kinetic Rugby League website and store in the description down below. But that's going to be it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.